Hello guys, I made myself a gigantic cup of tea and I'm ready to have fun now. I'm very excited because I will be doing authorization, a process in which actually we decide shall we show some resources to our users or not. Okay, let's use right now one of our CRUD controllers which we have already created to demonstrate the concepts. Gonna use for this demonstration my CSN user controller, and in particular this one, user doctrine controller. Let's look at this controller, see what do we have inside. Okay, so here we have the four CRUD actions: index, which actually is retrieve from the CRUD abbreviation, create action, update action, and delete action. Right now, everybody who comes to my site actually can access this controller and can do whatever he likes. Okay, let's try that. CSN user doctrine index. Okay, here we go. Now, everyone can create a user, can edit, here we go, and can delete it. I'm gonna demonstrate this right now. I don't want that. I want to control the access to these four actions. I have gone through already through the process of creating authentication controller. Here we go. Login. This is my out doctrine index login. I have shown this in a different tutorial. If you didn't watch it and you want, please go ahead and watch it. Okay, so what gives me the authentication? The authentication actually gives me the mechanism to recognize the users and know who they are. When they come to my CSN user doctrine index, I will know if this user have gone already through the authentication process, and I will know who the guy is. For example, Stoyan, and his role is member or other role, whatever. Because in the database I assign roles to my users. This is what we did in the previous tutorials. And this is how we're gonna use the roles actually. Or access levels. Right now it's more appropriate to talk about the access levels. So let me show you that. Show you the database. Here it is. We have here one record, Stoyan, ID 54, and the role ID is number 3. So access level of Stoyan is number 3. Let's use this somehow to control the access to my CSN user doctrine controller. Okay, let's follow the intuitive way of doing it. We'll open the controller, the actions. We will ask for authentication service, which actually knows if we did identify or not. We'll take the role or access level and we will check. If, for example, the access level is 3, then we will show this action. If not, we will kick out our user. We'll redirect him to the home page. Okay, let's do that. I actually have done it already. So what I have done is I just copy this controller. I have created the view scripts. I have created everything necessary. I have modified the module config PHP file just to make sure that this controller works, and I have started to work on it. I call this simple authorization controller. This is our first step because I'm gonna show you different steps of this process, of this, how to say that, this thinking, this process of finding the right way to do it. Okay, so user doctrine simple authorization controller actually is a copy of our well-known user doctrine controller, which is a simple CRUD. Okay. This is the first thing which comes usually to my mind when I want to restrict the access. So let's look at the code now. Here it is, our original code. This is our index action. Here we don't care about who is accessing the action, but in this simple authorization, again the same controller, user doctrine simple authorization controller, we will write a little bit more code. So here we go. I'm starting here from line 52 and I'm starting to think now. Authorization process. Every time new instance of authorization service. Now I have to get somehow the information about the user. As I said in the previous tutorial, in the tutorial about the authentication, I explained it actually how this process is done and how can you use this authentication everywhere, probably in the application. Here it is how you do it. You just instantiate one instance of authentication service class and it's ready to go. Now you can ask this out variable has identity. If yes, that means that we know who the guy is and we can judge, shall we show this action or not to this guy. This way you can use it everywhere in your code, in all your applications, in all your actions. You just have to instantiate one object of this class, Zend authentication service. I didn't use actually the use here keyword just to show you how I'm getting it. Authentication service. Every time you can create a new object in your actions. This is one way to do it. And after that you can ask this out object has identity. Is this user already gone through the authentication process? Do you know about it? Okay. Let's see how that works. Now, here's Zend doctrine, and see here I have to type simple authorization index. Wow. Has identity, error occurred and occurred during execution, root with name out not found. Yeah, the problem is that I'm trying to redirect here to one root which doesn't exist at all. So I don't have to in fact redirect there. I can redirect to home directly. Let me look at the module configuration file. Let's find one root which exists actually, because this doesn't exist at all. We can actually redirect to CSN user or something else. It doesn't really matter. And in fact I will do it with home because I'm sure it exists. It exists. So in other words, if there is no identity, if we don't know this guy, we are not gonna allow him to see this action, to execute the action and see the results. This is the right wording for that. Okay, let me try again. Here we go. As you can see, our action protects itself. CSN user, doctrine simple authorization index. If I try to access this action, you will see that the action will kick me, is not gonna be executed. I just will be returned to home again. How that's done, I explain it and I'll do it again. You just have to instantiate one object of class Zend authentication service, and after that ask this object has identity. Do you know this user which is trying to access? If not, redirect. That's all. Okay, so let's log in and try again. I will log in, Stoyan, password, and I will log in now. Let's see if this action will allow us now to access it. Again, CSN user doctrine simple authorization index. Wow. Okay, the problem comes from the fact that we're using Zend authentication service, the pure one, but in fact we are using doctrine login, so that's why we have to change it and get it directly from the service locator. Another thing which I see here is that in case we're using doctrine, then we have to use, of course, get user ID. It's a function, it's a method, and we have to redirect to home, to root which exists. Right now I'm using some other experimental roots, so that's why I did it right in front of you. Okay, this is not the point. The point is that if we want somehow to control the access to our action, then what we have to do is just somehow get the information about the user which is trying to get to our action. After that, make a decision. Second, make a decision based on his access level. Do we have to show him this action or not? Okay, two simple steps. And this is how we get actually the information about the user. I always imagine that there is a special house where the guys go and identify themselves. They say, okay, my username is this, my password is this, do you know something about me? So the guard goes back to the database room, checks for this username and password, and if he finds a record, he says, okay, I will give you a session ID. I will actually attach to your session ID information about you. So he writes down all the information about the user, the access level, his name, and everything what we know and everything what we want to keep in this temporary storage. This is actually the session. I imagine the guard writing on a piece of paper, and he's putting this piece of paper on his table, and after that he says, okay, you can go around in our application. I know your session ID which is on your chest. I write it down, your session ID, also on this piece of paper, and I know all the information about you. So this is what the authentication service does. So this guy, this guard actually, is our authentication service. Once we get to him, we can ask him, do we know the guy? Out has identity, and if eventually he knows this guy, he has this piece of paper about this guy, he can give us all the information necessary. In this case, we will ask, okay, authentication, get the identity, give me your piece of paper, and after that we will ask this piece of paper on which is written the information about the user. Okay, give me the user ID, the user role ID of this user, and we will have it. After that, we're checking this user role, the access level, with, as you can see here, hard-coded access levels. And if we don't want to show, we don't want to execute this, allow the member, this user, to execute this action, we will kick him to our home folder. Okay, so let's do it now. Okay, as you can see, this action controls the access to himself, and in this case is going to show the information. But if we say, okay, access level 3, then we will be kicked. Come on. User role ID. How much it should be? We should be redirected, yes, because the access level actually of my user in this case was 3. Okay, so right now we are setting the access level number 4. All the users with access level bigger than 3 actually will have access to our index action. In this case we will show the list of our users. Let's bring it back to 3. Okay, this is the most intuitive way of doing the authorization. So in this case, if we're gonna do it this way, we have to copy all this code and paste it to another action, create action, because we want to control who is accessing our create action. As you can see here, I have done it already, and we have to do it for the next and for the next, and it's always one of the same code. The only difference is access level. We don't follow the principle dry. This is the first thing which I notice, because we repeat ourselves everywhere. And also there are two problems which I see. First, we delegate the decision making process to the action, and that's not a business of our action. Our action decides which access level is allowed to see and execute, of course, and after that to see the results of this action. And the second, this is not the proper place. It's not really the business of the action to decide the access. So somehow we have to get rid of that. The code, this code, doesn't look nice here in the action. What if we move this controller and its actions to another application, and in this application the access levels are decided to be different, organized, different access levels, different method of authorization. So in this case our controller is not gonna work, because the code is embedded inside of the action. We don't want that. So let's get rid of these problems. The first problem, as I said, is we delegated the decision-making process to our action. Somebody else should make the decision which role sees what, which access level actually, in this case, because we are not talking about the roles, we are talking about numbers, which access level should have access to this action. Okay, and this is done with the help of something called access control list. So this is what I wanted to introduce actually. Thank you God, Zend has an access control list component, and we can use it. There are simple terms, simple things we have to remember. The access control list looks exactly like a human readable list on which we write the role, the resource, and the privilege which we give this role. And the access list answers with true or false. In other words, access control list gives us the information: do we have to have access of this role to this resource and to this privilege or not? Here it is how actually it looks. First, we add the roles. We say, okay, in our system we will have 3 roles: guest, member, admin. Of course the roles could be named differently, and we can have different numbers of roles. It just happens that I'm gonna show you the same roles. And after that we add resources. We say, okay, now we add some resource. In our case, the controller will play the role of the resource. ACL deny guest some resource, for example. This is the way how we deny the access of the role guest to our resource, to our controller. Acl allow member some resource. This is the way we allow. This is how actually we describe it. Acl can be applied everywhere. It's not necessarily only for the software. For example, you can claim that your room is your resource. You name it my room, and you create 3 roles: my mom, my pap, my sister. And after that, in this ACL, you can define and say, for example, my mom, the role my mom, my resource, my room, can enter, can clean up, can do whatever. Because here, the privileges are not shown. Let me look at for privileges somewhere. Okay. Here we go. Acl allow, for example, you can say the editor resource everywhere, and here you can say what privileges, what action could execute the editor: publish, archive, delete. This is what we are gonna use. We will claim that our controller is our resource. After that, we will define 3 roles, and we will describe this role has access, is allowed to access this resource, this controller, and is allowed to execute such and such actions. Okay. Once I introduces the ACL, introduces the access control list, let me show you how this could be done. As I said, we're solving right now the first problem, which I see with the naive or intuitive authorization. Okay, config ACL global. I just will create one configuration file in which I will describe the access. By the way, this this configuration file could look differently, depends on your parser. After that, I will give this configuration file to a specific class, object, and in particular to method of this object, which is gonna parse this configuration file and is gonna create the access control list object for us. Okay, so here we go. I, for example, can say my resource, but let's start with the roles first. Here it is how I define the roles. In a simple text format, I just explain the roles, and as you can see, we have the option of inheritance. So I say guest inherits nobody, but member inherits guest. Whatever the guest can do, member also has the privileges to do it. Admin in this case inherits member. So in other words, whatever the member can do, the admin also can do it, but admin can do things which the member cannot do. Okay, now the resources, and here the keyword is allow. As I said, this configuration file could be changed, depends on your parser. I took from internet one parser, which I'm gonna show you as well. So all I have to do is just send as a parameter this configuration array to my parser, and I'm gonna get the access control list object. Okay, here it is. Let me show you the parser, and I have to give a credit to the creator of this file. I'm in CSN user. I also have created ACL parsers, and I just I'm using this one just because it's easier for me to do it. Okay, so it has been created by Marco Newman. I have to give the credit to the guy, and as you can see, the constructor takes single parameter, which is the configuration array. It takes this configuration array, does all this magic internally. It adds all the roles which are described in the configuration. After that, it adds all the resources and create the allow and denied statements. After that, this object, as I said, which we have Acl, we can ask simple questions like, okay, this role, this resource, this is the privilege, is allowed or deny, and the answer is always true and false. This way we can actually solve this issue, the first issue. We don't have to delegate to the action the decision-making process. Somebody else, in this case the access control list, will make the decision. The good in this case is that we have only one central place for making the decisions. We go in the access control list configuration file, we change, for example, the access, and it changes everywhere across the entire application, even though we leave the code as it is right now. But I'm gonna show you that just a bit later. Right now I'm not showing this. I'm still here using the access levels, and the action is making the decision itself. Okay. Now, in order to show you the very same thing, but with access control list, I will create a different controller. I just keep these steps in a different controllers just to be easy to understand. So this one was user doctrine simple authorization controller, which demonstrates the most naive, intuitive method of controlling the access to your action. And this method was just putting the code directly in the action, in the beginning of the action. Here it is. The first thing is you have to get the authorization service, so you can ask questions about the user, you can ask the access level, the name of the user, whatsoever. And the second, you make the decision directly in the action. And as you can see, as I said, it's hard-coded here. So let's say tomorrow I want to change the access to this action. I want to say that I want to have all the guests to be able to access these actions. I want all the guests. In this case, I have to go through all the application or all the actions and change the access level to 1. What if I forget one of them or something else happens? If tomorrow I decided to bring it back, I again have to go through the entire code and eventually through the all application and change again the code, which is not a convenient way. So that's why I'm introducing the access control list. So in the decision making process, let's involve the access control list. This way we will have a centralized system, and in step 2 we'll see how we are going to remove the entire code from here and delegate actually the decision making to somebody else. Okay, not the decision making process of accessing the action. We'll see how we are going to do that. Okay, to demonstrate the step 2, I have created actually another controller. It's called Simple Authorization Acl controller. So far I had only simple authorization. Now I'm going to involve the Acl in all this process. Okay, let me open and demonstrate how that works now. Look, the code still stays in the action, but the decision-making process is given to somebody else. is given to the ACL. Let's compare again. I'll put these two next to each other. And let me repeat again. So first, get the authorization service. That is not changed. Authorization. Authorization. As you can see, the first part has not changed. Before we continue, I almost forgot, I'll explain to you the three different ways to get the authorization service. Okay, the first one is each time you instantiate the authorization service. Nothing bad with this approach, but the most intelligent, of course, is to use the service locator. Authorization service is defined in the configuration, in the factory, and you can get it directly from the service locator. So this is the second way to get to the authorization service. And there is an even more convenient way. There is a controller plugin which directly gives you the information about the user, and you just have to say this identity. Here it is. Those are the three ways you can get to this authorization service. Actually, the third one doesn't give you access to the authorization service. It gives you directly the information about the user. But in any case, those are the three ways you can use to get the information to the user of the user. In my case, I have to use the service locator because my authentication is done through Doctrine, and Doctrine is using a special authorization service. So I have to use it this way in order to get the information about the user, which we know already. Okay, so nothing special here. Again, the code is in the beginning of the action, which is not good, as I said. This is part of the problem, but we carry on this problem for now. After that, we'll see how we are going to solve it. Very easy. We get the information about the user, so we can get his role or his access level in our case. And after that, in the first case, we make the decision. In the second, in the improved variant, now we're going to use the access control list and delegate the decision-making process to the access control list. Here it is how it's done. Now, step 2 gets replaced. Before we allow somebody to access our action, we will go through all this trouble and ask the access control list, do we have to give access or not to this role? Okay, this is how it's done. By purpose, I have done it everything here in greater details to show you everything, to reveal everything. So this is how I get the config. After that, I instantiate, as you can see, one object of class CSN user ACL, and as I said, this object will be already set because I'm sending the configuration parameters. So my ACL rules will be already set. I will have all my roles, in this case only 3, all my resources and all the rest of the configuration done. Okay, so that's why I need a special custom class, which you can find, by the way, on the repository Wingman007 FMI. By the way, this authorization is done already. We'll see how. It's done by a special model which you can find in our modules called CSN Authorize. By the way, you can participate there, or you can create your own authorization, whatever is more convenient for you, but everybody who wants to participate in our modules, cohesion is more than welcome. Okay, so access control list object. After that, we are setting the default role. The default role here is guest. I'm gonna show you that. Here it is. As I said, this is a custom built, again, custom defined class which extend ACL, Zend ACL, and only the role which it plays is to parse the configuration file and set itself with all the roles and all the ACL rules. Okay, so this object ACL, it's already set. Now, once I have the identity, I can say, okay, give me the user role. Not like this, of course. In the case of doctrine, I have to say get user role ID. Once I have the user role ID here manually, because I don't have in the database table role, which I will have in the future, but for this tutorial we don't have, I'm using a switch and I'm setting the roles according to the access levels, to the role ID. Okay. The default one is guest. Since I don't have administrators yet, I can leave it empty, or I can say, okay, number 3 is administrator. Let me look at here. See, the highest role is number 3, administrator. Number 1 is guest, as you can see. Admin. This all process should be, not the entire process, but all this information should be into the database. So in our module, which we have installable through Composer, we don't have the access control list still in the database, but we are in process to create that. Okay. Now, based on the IDs which we are getting from the database, we set our roles here. As I said, this is gonna come from the database. Right now we have to do it manually. Once we have set the role, now we get the resource which our user is trying to access. The resource would be our controller, and the privilege which our user is trying to get access to is our action. Okay. So from the root we get the controller, which is gonna be our resource, and from the root also we get the action which is gonna play the role of our privilege for the access control list. Now, once we have the role, which we get from the authentication service, once we have the controller, which we get from the router, and the action, we can ask now the ACL. And of course we have the ACL itself, which describes all the roles, whatever. Okay, here it is, the most important statement here. Now we don't delegate the decision-making process to the action anymore. We have delegated this to the ACL, and we can ask the ACL, okay, for this role, the resource is the controller, is allowed to get to this action, and if the ACL, which we control through our ACL global configuration, if the ACL answers with the answer true, we don't do anything. We just allow the user to get to our and execute our action. If no, he will be redirected, and I will redirect again to home here, because as I said, I have done this selection many times already, So I don't remember where did I where do you redirect. Okay, so let's try and see if that works right now. So each time when you create a controller, an action, you have to go to the Acl global and register this resource. Let me see, where is that? Simple authorization Acl. Here we go. As you can see here, the definition is I give access to the index action to the guests. So let's see if that's true now. CSN user doctrine symbol simple authorization, but I have to add Acl here. Yes, I have control, I have access. As you can see, I have access to the index action. Let's make one experiment. Let's now say that only members have access here to this action. So I will repeat again. The controller plays the role of the resource. The action, the name of the action, plays role of the privilege. This is what we are asking now our Acl. For this role, this resource, and this privilege is allowed and depends on the answer. Right now I'm logged in, so probably I will be able to access this action. But let's make an experiment. I will remember this URL and I will log out from the system. Okay, I logged out. Let me try again to access index. See, I get automatically redirected. Here it is. The access control list actually tells me, do I have to give access to this action or do I have to redirect? Okay, so we solved the first problem. Actually, the first problem was that decision making shouldn't be in the action, should be done by somebody else, and this somebody else is the access control list. And doing that, now we have a global access, global control on the access. I will say guest and try again. See, I'm not logged in, I'm not known for this system, I'm a guest by default, but I still can access this action. One central point which controls the access to different resources in our application. This is exactly what we want. One central point. Not to have code spread around our actions and controllers. Right now, we still have the code spread around our actions, of course, and in the controllers. And just in a minute, we'll see how we will avoid this second problem. Okay, but we have at least one central point for decision making. Okay, so now let's solve the second problem. We don't want to repeat this code everywhere in our actions. That's not the business of the action, as I said in the beginning. So let's put this code in its proper place. Thank you God, Zend Framework 2, it's event driven. So we will be listening for a certain event and execute this code. We will know where the user is trying to get, to which controller, to which action from the router. We can get his identity, we can get his role, and ask there the ACL, the access control list. We also can get the access control list there. And we can make the decision somewhere else, not in the controllers, not in the actions. So let's create a module. Okay, as usual, I'm gonna start by creating a folder which will contain our newly created modules. CSN authorize, and I'm gonna help myself by copying the code just to save time. It's extremely simple but extremely powerful module. I would say this is one of the most important modules in the application. Authentication, authorization, and navigations are absolutely necessary for each one of the applications, at least for my applications. So this one is the most, maybe one of the most important modules, because all of three are very important. But authorization gives me the feeling that I have control over the application, and it glues together the application. In fact, once you have access, then you can concentrate on the business logic and forget about the access control and all this kind of stuff which is delegated to this module. Okay, as usual, we start by creating the module, and all the code, everything is gonna be in this module. Let me show you the module, how it looks. So namespace, CSN authorize ACL. This is the parser. Actually, it extends Zend ACL, access control list, and as I said, just reads the configuration, and we have all the rules already set for ourselves. Now we do the standard things: get config, auto load, and now for the authorization. On Bootstrap, now we have to create event listener. We have to attach to a certain event and just listen. Event listener on root. This is what I do. In the on Bootstrap, I just create one event listener on root. And here it is, the event listener. Zend event manager, event interface. This is what we get as argument. I'm getting the application because all I need is just to get to the service manager. From the service manager I can get to the authorization service, because this is the first thing I need. If you remember here, first thing to do is just to get somehow to the authentication service, because authentication service, the guard, can give us the list with all the information written in the session or whatever for our member. Right now we are using as adapter, as a storage adapter for authentication service, we're using the session, and usually it's used the session. Okay, this is the first thing to do. I'm getting the configuration because I will need the access control list. See, we're getting information and objects from different sources. Just to answer the question, are we gonna allow this user to get to this resource? Okay, so the configuration, again from the service manager. It's a central point of our application. We create the access control list, sending the configuration. We set the default role, which is guest. We're doing exactly the same thing. We're just moving the code from the beginning of each action to one central place. And this central place is an event listener, which is attached on root event. When the input, the request actually have been tokenized, the URL, and we know where our user is trying to get. After that, because we still don't have a table in the database, we set up the roles: guest, member, admin. We're asking the router, the controller, and the action. The controller plays the role of our resource, and the action plays the roles of the privilege, because to answer the question, the Acl should know the role, the resource, the privilege. Okay? We're checking here if such resource exists. If not, we will throw an exception. After that, we ask the Acl the standard thing. Okay, the role which we took from the authentication service, actually not directly the role, but the information to determine the role of the user. The controller, which plays the role of our resource in our configuration here. And after that, the action. We have again the action from the router. And after that, if the answer of the Acl is no, this role has no permission, is not allowed to get to this resource and execute this privilege. This action doesn't have the privilege to this privilege on this resource. If no, then we redirect to home. We set the status code and send the headers. Okay, it's a very simple but extremely powerful. That's all we have to do in this module. Of course, now, just to be self-contained the entire module, we have to add the Acl parser, and this is what I'm gonna do as well. This the Acl parser, it's in Acl here, and the configuration is nothing special. We don't even need the configuration. I just put it to show the standard things. That's all. And the last step, of course, is just to add this module to our application config. Let me do that. And even though this authorization module somehow stays in the shadows and we don't see it really, to manifestate its presence is extremely important, because it stays deep into the application and decides who has rights to see what and access what. Okay, so I'm gonna add this CSN authorize, and in fact we are ready. We have to have Acl global, or you can name it differently, it doesn't matter. We have to have the configuration, of course, in our autoloads, in our autoload folder, and the parser, if you want to call it this way, of the Acl, which is gonna create our Acl. If you like, of course, in the module you can create the access control list manually, but I prefer to use a configuration and the parser, because this gives me a great flexibility. So we have something like a crossrow. This is the central point where the CSN authorize leaves, or junction, if you want to call it this way. Let's say our member or our user tries to get somewhere. Let's say this is our controller and those are his actions. CSN authorize stays on its way and asks, okay, do I know you? What's your role? By default, the role is guest. If the authentication service doesn't give us any other information, the assumption of the CSN authorization is that this is a guest. After that, CSN authorization is asking our router, okay, which is the controller, in other words the resource you're trying to get, and what is the action? Privilege. We get this from the router. And after that, the CSN authorize asks the access control list. Okay. It says, okay, I know the role. This is the role. This is the resource it tries to get to, and this is the privilege it tries to execute. Is it allowed or not? If the answer is yes, then the CSN authorization allows you to get there, allows us, our user, to get to the controller and execute the action. If not, it's going to be redirected to our home, which is another controller and action, of course. And be careful here, just not to create an infinite loop. Just make sure that the index action of the index controller, where you redirect, or whatever they are called, are allowed for the guests. That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this authorization tutorial and you understand the basic concepts. Authorization lies in the heart of the application. Thank you for watching this tutorial. See you the next time. Bye.